It's 5 on the dot on my calendar. So, my name is Bo English Fitchling. I'm on the Apex product development team, and I'm here to introduce you to Tyson, who is going to talk about Apex developers' tools of the trade, applications, and tools to aid in application development. Over to you, Tyson.
Thank you very much, Bo, and thank you very much for having me. This is really exciting. I feel like there's a lot of really impressive people that have been on this agenda, and I'm honored to be here. So thank you very much. So as mentioned, I'm going to be talking about Apex tools and things that we can use to help aid in our Apex development. I will be spending some time focusing on just features that are built into the Apex builder. And we'll also look at some tools outside the scope of that. Who exactly am I, and why should you trust anything that I say? I've been a developer, Apex developer for 12 years. I'm currently an instructor and a consultant for skill builders. And I'm a pretty huge D&D nerd. I find that I think especially right now, I've been spending a lot of time sitting behind the computer and just staying inside. And I find that I like to use things that get me away from the computer, away from technology. And I spend a lot of that time, in order to do that, I garden, I run, and I play D&D. In terms of the actual tools that we're going to look at, we're going to focus on some developer tools, as well as some educational tools, things that I like to use to make sure that I'm staying up to date and I know what's going on with the tool and aware of new features and things that are coming. And then, as mentioned, we're going to focus on some tools that are in the builder itself. And I think the first one, the first tool, I think the most important tool when being an Apex developer and just being involved in the web is which browser do you use? And I find that, in my opinion, it comes down to really two. Either you want to use Firefox, and if you choose to use Firefox, I recommend that you use the developer version. And then there's also Chrome. And in terms of pure or just raw features, I had used Chrome for several years, and I grew very comfortable with it, and that has been my go-to for a really long time. But about a year and a half ago, I ended up switching to Firefox developer version, and it was a little bit rough at first, that transition, just because I was accustomed to where everything was in Chrome, and it's not in the exact same spot. But I realized that being able to inspect pages and adjust or be able to see different Flexbox settings and different properties, it functions just the same or very well. But one thing that I guess this is more of like a political thing, I guess. I just am more for the open web, and so for that, I want to kind of throw my hat into Firefox's ring, and I want to hope that they can get more market share. Certain developer tools that I think are super helpful, just general purpose helpful things, being able to inspect elements and filter on different settings and properties to be able to see kind of how a particular element is being manipulated. In particular, one thing that I like is being able to view Flex containers, and we'll look at that here in a second. As well as a super general helpful tool is just being able to visualize the box model. And so let's kind of go in and look at that, and let's see kind of what we can do. I kind of have an Apex page that's open here. This is just like a general master detail. The page is a little bit busy, but I kind of wanted a lot of things on this page so we can look at and play with some stuff. First and foremost, if you want to open up the developer tools, F12, that's pretty much the same no matter what browser you choose to use. But in terms of being able to edit a particular element, or you want to inspect the properties of something, right-click Inspect Element will take you to that location. One thing that I find quite enjoyable is that just mousing over a particular element will show you exactly where it is on the page, as well as give you a little bit of a preview of the box model properties. Over here on the right-hand side, you can edit properties, and I think this is probably something that you probably have done or some exposure to. But one thing that I really like is being able to filter for particular styles. And if I'm curious if a particular property is being said or what's happening, like maybe I want to check out if something's going on with overflow, I can start filtering for overflow, and I can see, okay, that's the CSS class or the selector that's actually adding that. I find that is can be extremely helpful. Another thing that I wanted to show, and I think I have it in report templates here, is that in this example, I have a card report, and maybe I want to customize how this title is being laid out. And so I'll go ahead and I'll right-click and I'll inspect the title on my card. And this card actually uses some layout or some Flexbox properties. And so let me go ahead and just check for Flex. Oops, I want here. And I can actually see that there indeed is a Flexbox property that's on this particular element. And what I think is kind of cool is you can toggle this display of just Flex, so you can see kind of what the container is, how it's bound, and how exactly it's getting positioned that way. I'm also really happy to see that the newer versions of the universal theme are leveraging Flex a lot more. But yeah, so we have these really helpful tools to try to inspect and see what's going on. There is a little shortcut here. This little tiny button, it's kind of hard to see, but that is also a toggle. It's the same thing as clicking this button over here on the right-hand side. So you can kind of see how that Flex is positioning that component. And the other helpful piece that's been around for a very long time is this box model. If you want to see, in particular, which box model property is being modified and is causing the component or the element to look the way that it is, we can see that. So yeah, get familiar with your browser properties or your editor developer tools. If you're kind of want to play around with JavaScript and experiment with that, you can do so in the console. I'm not going to focus too much on that. I find a lot of people have talked about the console. The other thing that we have to take a look at are the different languages that we have to, or the different technologies that we have to touch on as Apex developers. And I think a lot of developers come from a PL SQL background, and maybe you spend a lot of time working on Oracle forms and reports and producing those types of applications. But now, when we get to Apex, you're being asked to customize HTML, CSS, right? JavaScript. We no longer have triggers and forms that we can use. You have to write event-based JavaScript code. Luckily, there are a lot of declarative features in the builder that abstract a lot of this, a lot of the requirements of writing this for us. But sometimes when you get into more complex applications, you have to start writing this code. And my general recommendation is do it declaratively first. Do it as simply as possible to get it done. And then after that feature or that product has been released, if you want to iterate on it and make it, if you realize that maybe you do want to customize this component more, or you want to add these extra features, or there is going to be added value by adding more custom code to this application, then go ahead and add that. How do we add that, or kind of how do we even get started writing that type of code? And there's all sorts of editors that we can pick. And I find that I don't believe that there's one perfect editor. The editor is what you make it. And I will say that if you are writing JavaScript and CSS, and if you're writing any code just in straight Notepad, all right, there's probably a better editor out there for you. But I've used all of these editors throughout my career of developing. I remember when I first was in school learning how to write HTML. I was using Notepad++, and I remember encountering Dreamweaver, and I thought that was just super amazing that it wrote all this HTML for me. But since then, I think things have evolved, and I find that I'm really torn between Sublime Text and Visual Studio Code. I find that I used Sublime Text for several years. I enjoyed it. Probably, probably about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. I don't know. It's been a while. I swapped over to Visual Studio Code, and I've been really happy. One thing that I found out is that no matter what editor that you use, you need to become comfortable with whatever the shortcuts are that editor provides. And luckily for me, because I had become so comfortable with the Sublime Text shortcuts, there is an option in Visual Studio Code to kind of swap the key bindings and shortcuts to actually use Sublime Text. But that being said, when you choose these editors, baseline, they're really nice. Baseline, that you get some syntax highlighting and you get a lot of help, but you're still going to want to customize it a little bit more to suit kind of our needs, or to suit your needs. And what you're doing might be a little bit different than what I'm doing. But there are some general purpose extensions that I like to use, and I'm going to go over some of these extensions because I think they're really super cool. And the first two are I think I could probably classify as they're a little bit silly extensions, or they don't they don't do anything really big, but it's just like a little bit of value that I think can potentially save you from some issues. So let's take a look at bracket pair colorizer and as well as cursor align. All right, so bracket pair colorizer is going to actually require us to be probably in some JavaScript here. And we can actually see it at work right now. I apologize if you're not familiar looking at JavaScript. We're going to be bouncing around in a couple different languages throughout this talk. At the moment, we'll be looking at JavaScript. And I just want to point out that what bracket pair colorizer does is that I have this parenthesis, and then you can see it closes down here. And you can see it, if I'm in between these two parentheses, it actually draws a line to the closing parenthesis, and it has a color match to it. The same thing is true is if I take a step forward and actually get into this curly brace, you can see it actually is drawing the line to that curly brace. And I find it seems like such a silly, simple thing. But in some cases, if like I'm doing demos and stuff and things are zoomed in, maybe I want to zoom this in so you can see this code a little bit better. And then this bracket is gone. Sometimes you might have some auto formatting code that'll bring that back in line. Sometimes not. Sometimes you're just in the moment writing code and you're thinking, what's going on? And if I didn't have this and I didn't realize that those brackets were there, they were just off the screen, I might try to actually close this. But now I have a serious problem because now I have this floating code out here that I need to resolve. That's bracket pair colorizer. And I think that is, I guarantee you, that has saved me from several hours of just debugging the little things. The other thing that I want to talk about is cursor align. And I guess I'll do that in a PL SQL example, just so you can kind of see that. I'm going to open up a new file, Control-N to open that file. And I'm going to change my language mode just for a second, and I'm going to change it to PL SQL. I'm using Visual Studio Code here to kind of swap between different languages fairly easily. This snippet that I'm going to be typing doesn't really matter too much what the actual value is, but I just want to show you. I'm just going to get these kind of all goofed up. and we'll say pparam3 value 3. And yeah, so we can see at the moment that this not lined up. And one of the things that I love about most new editors is multi-line editing. And multi-line editing just allows us to edit multiple lines at the same time, so it's aptly named. If you want to initiate some sort of multi-line editing, the easiest way I find to do it is if or in Visual Studio Code, hold down Alt, click and drag, and then now we have our multi-line editor. Now, that's only half the battle. Once you get into this habit of using multi-line editing, you also need to kind of spend some time getting accustomed with some of the keyboard, like generic keyboard navigational utilities that are part of, I guess, the operating system. It's not really part of a particular editor. And that is, one, just holding Control and hopping to the right. That'll jump one word. But also, if you hold Shift, that'll also highlight as you move your cursors. So you can kind of combine those two things. And so if I hold Control and use my arrow keys, I can kind of navigate around to where I want my cursors to be. If I do that same thing by holding Control, but then I also add Shift, it's also going to start selecting. And as I step this back and I have this selection that I want, I have a shortcut that I use, Alt-A, and it's going to align my cursors so that it just looks nice. Do I always have to do this? No. You might have a formatter that formats entire documents for you. Maybe if you're in like a code snippet like this, or it's just like a document fragment that doesn't like fit well into a formatter, then something like this I think can be extremely helpful. The other thing that the other extension that I really like is called File Utils, and basically all that this means is that it just adds a couple extra utilities for managing and dealing with files. So maybe, for example, I have this demo HTML document, and maybe I want another file that's just like this, but I just want to rename it and have it be something just slightly different. If I open up my command palette by pressing F1, I can say duplicate, and it's going to duplicate this file with a new name, kind of in the exactly where it is, and so I'll call this demo 2. And now I have demo and demo 2. It's very easy for me to kind of add more files or duplicate this file to be able to copy this content. I don't actually need this file, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. When it comes to if version control and viewing documents that are being managed and edited by multiple people, I find it's extremely helpful if you have something like Git Lens. And this will give you, and I think this current repository is not actually Git enabled, just a random folder. But yeah, perfect. You can see here that as my cursor sits on this line, it says, who edited this line? Well, I did 7 months ago, and I was baselining something for version 19.1. That's what happened. And so I find that 6 days ago, I converted this file to be I kind of was changing this product around, kind of restructuring some things. So I can kind of get an idea of why this line, the last thing that happened to this line, and some context as to why, who did it, and how long ago it happened. And I really like that because it's just a nice quick glance at what's going on this line. The next piece that I want to look at, I think, is really cool. And I'm going to go back to my demo.js file to show this one. I find that a lot of developers are not super comfortable writing JavaScript, or at least JavaScript is kind of one of those like stretch goals. Maybe you're really comfortable in SQL and PL SQL. You've been writing reports, for 20 years, and now you have to write JavaScript, and so it could be kind of hard to debug that. This next extension is called Quokka, and it's Quokka, Quokka. And I think it's pretty cool. What it does is it runs your JavaScript, and let me go ahead and get it started, and I'll go ahead and search for Coca, and I'll say toggle on current file. Should start. It's being very slow at the moment. There we go. And so what's cool about this, or what I think is interesting about this, is I really like this when I'm demoing things and demonstrating and just kind of debugging. One thing that happens is all of like your console output the output will be displayed at the line where the output happens. And I don't know, I just think it's really cool. I think it's helpful for being able to visualize maybe a little bit more what's happening. Yeah, super awesome. You do have to make sure that if you want any of this to work, you have to have Node.js installed on your computer. You can go to nodejs.org and download the most recent version, and then you should be good to go. Just note that if you download Node.js while you have Visual Studio Code open, you will have to shut down Visual Studio Code and restart it, and it should be able to find the path to Node and all that good stuff. The second piece, or I guess the last piece that I'm going to mention here has to do with demoing HTML files and static files that you have saved locally on your computer. Sometimes I'm just experimenting with how I'm going to perform a layout, or I'm just kind of hacking something up as just an experiment to see if an idea would work or not, or kind of how I would do something. And one way that I can achieve this, or kind of quickly iterate on that, is if I have some sort of like live server to test this information. So what I'm going to do is I have live server already open. I'm going to go ahead and close it. And I'm going to go ahead and start up a new server. So I'll just look for live, and I'll say open this file with live server. Okay. Takes a second. Demo with live server, it's up and running. And so any changes that I happen to make, if I want to get rid of this paragraph tag, I'll cut that out, Control S. You can see that it watches changes and updates and whatnot. If I want to change the background color to green yellow, save that. We should see that update. Ooh, that's kind of an obnoxious color. Let me get that. Let me get rid of that. Sorry for that. Yeah, so it just kind of checks my changes, and super easy to set up. And again, you have to have Node.js installed. It just makes a local web server just to serve these files. So that's kind of using an editor to kind of help your development. The other thing that I just want to mention is picking a good font makes your life easier, or makes your life better. I know that I have spent time trying to verify, is it is that an uppercase O? Is it a 0? What is it? Are they? It's hard to tell what character I'm looking at. And so I find I've used these different fonts. Right now I'm kind of using Fira Code. I'm a super generic developer, and I'm happy with Fira Code, but I know there's a lot of debate out there about which editor or which font is actually the best. But I've been enjoying Fira Code, and the biggest reason is because all of the characters that are presented have a unique footprint, and it's easy to identify what the characters are, and I love that. There's no confusion on, is it an L, an uppercase I, a 1, whatever, right? Everything looks different. So pick a font that helps you with that. I know you could see in this example, I think I had it here. Let me zoom this in a little bit. That I have these two characters, and once they get collapsed together, they actually make a font ligature. I think that's kind of interesting. But for teaching and training, sometimes I think that becomes problematic. And there's actually a setting in Visual Studio Code that if you want to turn that off, you can, and I'll just show you that. If you look up your user preferences, so preferences, open user settings, and I'll just search for LIG. And somewhere in here, it should say font ligatures. Oh, I actually have to edit that directly in the file. Let me go ahead and do that. And right here, font ligatures is set to true. I'm going to change it to false, save that. And so now when I come back to my my file here, it's not actually creating the font ligatures. And in case it wasn't clear, the font ligature is just characters that are next to each other that have some sort of general meaning, and it just kind of makes them look like one character. All right. So as small of a thing as it is, I do think picking a good font is helpful. Another thing that we have to deal with in our applications or in our application development is consuming RESTful services. I find that I've been asked to help build and consume more RESTful services from my Apex applications. And there's several tools you can use to do this, just like there are several editors that you can use to facilitate this. The big one, I think, is Postman. And I've been using Insomnia for a while, and I really like it. And there's a couple features of Insomnia that I think are really cool. That I can almost assure you that Postman probably has the same thing. But yeah, just a couple things that I found really helpful when trying to use these tools to kind of manage and deal with RESTful services. So some of the features in Insomnia that I really like are workspaces, and workspaces are just a super helpful way for us to organize a collection or a group of endpoints. And we'll also take a look at here in a little bit, when you create a workspace, you can also configure environments. So in this example that we're going to look at here in a second, I'll have a workspace and I'll have different environments, and you could change that maybe for dev, test, or prod. You could change environments, and you could have different environments mean maybe different clients. Maybe your environment is holding client credentials like usernames and passwords or something like that. And we could have the different values kind of stored in those environments. And I could say, oh, well, if I try to authenticate as user 1, how's that work? If I try to authenticate as user 2, how's that work? Always be cautious. Don't just put any password anywhere. Or passwords should not be easily viewed or checked into version control or anything like that. So just please be very careful when using these services in conjunction with things like user credentials. Let's go ahead and let's hop into it. Let's take a look. So I'm currently, this is in Insomnia, and I have a theme that I'm using that's just a little bit softer. It's not the typical purple theme of Insomnia. Sure, pick whatever theme that you'd like. That's great. In terms of what I like about this tool is, well, one, I just want to point out that I'm making a request to an Apex instance. And it's authenticated. It's using the OAuth client credential flow. And notice that my token URL, my client ID, and my client secret are just values, are essentially variables that I can reference in key locations. And when I click send, it should make the request. And actually, let me preview this. And I get some data back over on the right-hand side. We can, if we want to verify kind of, well, what actually happened here, we can click on timeline, and it's actually going to show me the order of operations that were taken to help facilitate this request. And so I find that timeline is extremely helpful when things go wrong and you're trying to debug what happened. We can inspect the different headers, again, the order in which things happened, and yeah, make sure that our values and things are accurate. how do we set up these environments, or how do we set up these variables here? Well, it turns out that over here on the left-hand side, we have environments, and I can actually come in here and say manage environments. And there's kind of like a base environment that you can configure. And and I don't think I can zoom in. I can't zoom in, but I guess I can, or we'll leave it like this for now. One thing that I can do is I can set up something like a base URL. I can set up, these are just dummy or test client IDs and a client secret. But one thing that I really like is that you can actually reference other values. Oops, let me say cancel. Even in your configuration, right? So the token kind of injection can happen in this configuration file, which I think is really cool. So you can see that my token URL is part of my base URL, or as an extension of my base URL. Notice that I have 4 values here: base URL, client ID, client secret, and token URL. But if I go to a sub-environment, such as client 1, you can see that all it supplies is client ID and client secret. So it kind of creates this like hierarchy, or if you're used to JavaScript, it's kind of like extending an object in JavaScript, and I suspect that's probably exactly what this is doing. And then you can see I have client 1 and client 2. In this case, both client 1 and client 2 have the exact same credentials. It's not important for this demo that they have different credentials. They could, but that's not necessary for this. So if I want to switch from client 1 to client 2, or from client 2 to client 1, I'll just select my client, say send, and it'll use whatever, it will inject the appropriate client ID, client secret, or whatever token URL that's needed. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is that this will let me control the request method that I'm going to be sending, and obviously that's critical when you're dealing with RESTful services. Cool. One problem that, depending on the endpoint that you're trying to communicate with, a problem that I sometimes encounter is Insomnia will reject, if a certificate is not valid for whatever reason, Insomnia will reject that request. So one thing that you might have to do is in your preferences, there's an option here called validate certificates, and I currently have it unchecked. If for whatever reason a request isn't working and you're not sure why, one thing I would do is I would try to see if it has something to do with if you have an invalid certificate, and unchecking this might actually help get your request through, and then you can figure out, well, why am I running into this issue? Cool. After we build our application and we have our RESTful service endpoints built and managed, the next thing that you might want to take a look at is actually building documentation for whatever the component is, or whatever it is that you've built. Make docs just basically reads over Markdown. Markdown is basically a slimmed down version of HTML. And ultimately, that file is going to be converted into HTML either at runtime, or it's going to be built into HTML and saved as static files. One thing that I really like about Make Docs is there's a little option that I'm going to use, and I'll show you, is you can use it to build static sites to even deliver to customers. And so sometimes what will happen is, and actually I'm working on some curriculum right now where I'm building most of the curriculum using MakeDocs, and it's been a pretty fun experience. And but I'm using a little flag that makes it so that I'm able to actually deliver students zip files of sites that they can run locally or offline, and they still get the nice experience of using MakeDocs. And in particular, I really like the material theme for Make Docs. It looks super awesome, and I'm actually going to go ahead and demo that for you now. Go ahead and close Insomnia. We don't need that anymore. And that's what this is over here. This is, and let me just show you, if you haven't seen Markdown before, this is Markdown. And this is a very simple page, and you can just see that it has some syntax highlighting. I have a Markdown syntax highlighter installed in the Visual Studio Code to help me out. And so how is this helpful? How does this translate to anything useful? Well, if I open up my terminal here, I can actually, let me cancel out of that. Okay. There's a couple things that I can do. Make Markdown or Make Docs has a couple commands, and one is if I'm currently developing this and I'm trying to change the look and feel, I can say Make Docs serve, and it'll take a second, and it's going to kind of basically set up a listener at this location here. Alt-click. Oh, it looks like it connected, but it's connected over here. Okay, and so we can see here that it was able to connect and serve this page. And as I make a change, let's do one more change here real quick, and we'll just keep it. Or let me do it here. I know, lame change. I'm sorry, but it should update. Yes. No. Ugh. All right. So there we go. So it did indeed update. It took a second, but it's pretty much live reloading these changes as I build stuff. Once I have my document finalized and I'm happy with how things are and I'm happy with the way that things look, well, now it's time for me to actually build the static site that I can give to the students or give to the client or give to whoever. In this case, I'm going to stop serving this directory, and I'm just going to say make docs build. And what's going to end up happening is it's going to take all that markdown. It cleans up my site directory. You can see that all sorts of things just got deleted. It's very angry and upset over here as files disappear and get rebuilt and all that good stuff. But now I actually have a built site that I can deliver that is essentially, in this case, it's kind of more like lessons, but it could totally be documentation describing different modules and how to use your tool and or whatever you're trying to document. That's the great thing about it. One important thing to remember is, or a couple things that I use in Make Docs that I found was really helpful. Make Docs has a configuration file that is in YAML. And if you want to build your custom navigation, then there's a little nav node that you can use. And I basically just say what the navigation is and what file it's going to go to. Notice that I've specified Markdown. And you're going to see in a second that once we go to the live site, it's not going to be going to Markdown. It's going to be going to HTML versions of those files. But what's most important is that here I say use directory URLs false. And this is absolutely critical if you want to have offline files that you can just hand to someone. Say, here's a zip file of our documentation, check it out. Or if you just want to have, if you just want to have documentation that you can deliver, that's not an online version. Obviously, if you can put this online, you should. Great. So yeah, that used files directory, which is I found extremely helpful. Notice that at the moment I'm looking at this from a I was looking at this through a local web server, If I go into my site folder and I just go to index here, you can see that it actually produced the valid HTML for the site. And if I open this in my default browser, it should still work. It does, and it still looks the same. And you can see there's my little testing there. But I just want to point out that this is a local file on my computer. And the important thing, the reason why I had to say use directory URLs false is because I need this .html to be added to the end so that I can have a local file. Because if I don't have that, you're going to get this file not found error, and you don't want that. That's no fun. And so now when I say add that .html back in, should work. Cool. So after you've built your application or built whatever it is, you can use make docs to try to document what goes on there. In terms of staying educated, and this is kind of less tools, more resources, you're here, so obviously you're up on the news and updates in the Apex community, and I find that Apex World is a fantastic resource for that, so wonderful. There's all sorts of aliases that you can use off of the Apex Oracle.com domain. And one that I really like is just API. It takes us right to the most recent API documentation. And I'm so grateful that that exists, especially I think it was either 19.1 or 19.2. I forget when they reorganized the documentation page. It became kind of difficult. It was difficult at first to find where exactly the documentation was. And you had to go to books and then pick the right book, and then, okay, then I got to the documentation. I found at first that was a little bit confusing. I frequently get questions about Apex, or I have students that say Apex doesn't, clearly tell me how to do X, Y, or Z. And I find that there's a ton of documentation out there, but I guess you have to know where to look. And the one place that I find can be extremely helpful is the App Builder's User Guide. And just today I directed a student here because they were asking questions about what are all the options for linking to interactive grids, and how do I use that? And so if we come to the here, this is the developer user guide, and it talks about, I'm in the managing interactive grids. I don't want that. I want managing interactive reports, and then linking to interactive reports. There's a whole bunch of documentation here clearly describing how you do this. And so I sent this to him, and he was very happy. Another thing that you could do to stay kind of educated with kind of the current happenings in Apex and the current version of Apex that you're using, I find it extremely helpful to install the Universal Theme sample application locally. Yes, you can go to apex.oracle.com/UT, and that takes you to the online version of the Universal Theme sample app. But it might be a version that's more recent than what you're using. And so, but the other thing that I like about installing the Universal Theme sample app locally is that you can inspect it and see what's going on. And what I mean by that is I have a local version of the Universal Theme sample app installed on my instance. And maybe I go through the example and I see this component, and I understand that the list template options are here. And the Apex team has done a fantastic job at describing how I should configure this. But I find sometimes I just like to see it. So I'll just edit this component, and it should set my context into the Universal Theme sample application, and I can see what's actually been configured, why this component looks this way, and I can even, if I want to, I could go look at the source behind. Well, how is this component getting its data? Is there anything special that's happening there? And I could, say go to list, and I could go and view that source there. Staying educated in the form of, in the context of web development, developer.mozilla.org. There, you just go to tutorials, pick whatever piece of information that you want to explore, and knock yourself out. One thing that I will say is, as you learn new web dev technology, you might kind of be on the bleeding edge of what's available. So another way to kind of verify if you're in the safe zone, or if you're using a feature that is going to be supported by browsers that you plan on targeting, you can use the Can I Use service. And I really enjoy Can I Use. And let me, did it not open? There it is. And so maybe you find something really cool about JavaScript and you want to use the, you want to use JavaScript modules, and you're really excited about that. You can come here and verify, well, how well is this going to land with my users? Oh, I want to support IE11. Maybe this is I'm in a no-fly zone. I can't do that. I mentioned before that I'm a nerd and I enjoy games, and why not combine the two things? Why not combine education with games? There's CSS Diner, Flexbox Froggy, and CSS Grid Garden. These are fantastic little games that you can use that just help kind of push you to kind of learn something new about web dev and learn something new. About in this case CSS. And I guess I also want to take this as a moment to just say that I get lots of requests from developers to learn more about JavaScript. I need to know JavaScript. The focus is JavaScript. I haven't really learned much about Apex yet, but I want to start doing all this really cool JS stuff. Well, one thing that I would recommend to all developers is, yeah, JavaScript is cool. CSS is also amazing. And I find that with ample CSS knowledge, understanding of how selectors actually work, what exactly specificity is, CSS cascade, what are those things, right? You can use these tools here to try to figure out what that is and how those work. And then I think you'll surprise yourself by spending time using CSS. You can realize, oh, maybe I don't need to implement this using JavaScript. I didn't realize that I can use transitions or transformations in CSS to be able to achieve this goal. I'm not going to demo those games, but they are here. One other tool that I find extremely helpful in the context of Apex is that oftentimes you want to be in an Apex application as multiple users. Maybe you're testing different roles or permissions. You're dealing with some security related feature. You want to be logged in as user A and user B or user C. They all have different roles, and you're just testing what's going on in the app. One quick fix to try to be logged into the same app as multiple users at the same time is to try to use either incognito or private browsing. That works well if you're just trying to do 2 accounts. But if you want a 3rd, 4th, 5th account, which I'll admit that's getting to 4 or 5 accounts, that's probably super edge case. But you could have n number of simultaneous sessions if you use the multi-account containers extension built into Firefox. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead. This is what private browsing looks like if you open a private browsing tab, either in Firefox or incognito in Chrome. It's in the upper right-hand corner. But I want to focus on multi-account containers because I think those are super cool. You can specify different colors, and the idea here is that each tab is isolated. It doesn't share information with other tabs. And so because of that, I can be logged into the same Apex instance as different users at the same time in the same browser. Let's check that out. So I'll run my app. And I should be able to, oh, well, I don't want to be in this app. I want to be in this app. So I'm currently logged in as Tyson Jouglet, but maybe I want to be logged in as a different user. So I have my URL. I'll just kind of copy that for a second. I come over here to multi-account container. I say I'd like to go ahead and be in a different session. Notice I get this little pink bar down at the bottom. I come into my app, and now I'm going to log in as Ben. Oh, I'm going to log in as Ben. I am logged in as Ben, and if I click a link, it resolves. If I come back over here, I'm logged in as Tyson Jouglet. This is the exact same app. If I click a link, it resolves. Hey, so now I have multiple sessions in the same browser. I don't have to do incognito mode, but I guess you do have to have the multi-account containers extension, which will isolate each browser tab, and I think that's really cool. I'm going to get. I'm just going to talk about some layout view stuff, and then that's probably going to be where I'm going to wrap up. So one thing that I want to talk directly to the builder here for a second, and I just want to say the layout view is awesome. I think it can be extremely helpful if you use it the right way, or if you're aware of the features that it has. So let's go ahead and let's just take a look at the layout view. Most importantly, we have these options that can be found in the upper right-hand corner of the layout view, and I find hiding buttons, hiding items, and hiding empty positions are extremely powerful when you're trying to use the layout view to kind of move components around. Let me show you. So I have a marquee page. A marquee page is the kind of like the master detail layout that you might have for a page, and this is just kind of demo information. And so there's a fair amount of stuff in here. I have some tabs here. I have multiple regions with items, buttons. It's kind of a busy page. Let me go ahead and edit this page and just see what this looks like in the builder. And when I look at my layout view after this loads, you can see it's kind of busy. I have all of my items. Like I have to scroll to get to all of my items. So how can I maybe make this better? Well, if we just go to our options here, one thing that I find extremely helpful when I'm dealing with like region positioning can be hide empty positions. Immediately, I get a lot of space back, and I can reposition my components as necessary. Sometimes, in this case, these regions don't have any items or buttons in them, but if they did, I could say hide buttons as well as hide items, and we can see actually I can fit all of my regions on my page, and it's easier for me to use this layout. I'll go ahead and show my buttons and items. And maybe I want to focus in on this one region, and I want to drag my items around and reposition things. So one of the things that you could do is right here, display from here, zoom into this region, and then now kind of all the other noise is gone. I can focus on this one region, prepare the layout exactly how I want it to be. When I'm done, I could zoom out. If for whatever reason I need even more space, I could zoom in, and then I could even expand. Okay, so now I got all sorts of space that I can work with. One last thing, and then I think I'm going to wrap up. Keyboard macros. One thing that I really like, I'm a gamer. Sometimes certain games have like hard combos of keys that I have to press. So why not make a macro that does it for me? I'm sure you could do that in your browser. You could probably find an extension that does that. My keyboard happens to have little macro keys just to the left-hand side. And so just to show you an example of something that you might be able to do, I'm not touching my mouse. I just want to make a new page. So I'm just going to press M1, and then my new page pops up. Let me go ahead and minimize all this, zoom out of this region. Maybe I want to zoom in and edit this particular region. So I'm going to poke macro 2. I just poked one button, and it kind of zoomed me into this component so that I can deal with it. That being said, I had a couple other things, but I'm a little overloaded. So we're going to kind of hop to the end. So in summary, go ahead and, in summary, use that layout view, find an editor that works for you, find a good font. And the other thing I would say is that in Apex, learn those shortcuts, or in any editor, learn the shortcuts that are available, and I find that it's extremely helpful. Take your mouse, move it to the side, only use your keyboard, see how well it goes.
Thank you, Tyson. We have a couple questions. Maybe we could go through those quickly before. There's one that says, what do you recommend for balancing concurrent sessions? Should I handle it with a database user or users in their own tables?
When it comes to having multiple sessions, I guess that you can try cloning the session maybe. I guess I would need. I guess I'm not totally sure, to be honest.
All right, next question. Can I use host command in Forms 6i to call an exe function file on the server? Is that possible in Apex?
That I'm really not sure.